Before his Senate candidacy, Don Blankenship was better known as the coal executive who oversaw a deadly mine explosion that killed 29 people in 2010. He served a one-year prison sentence after being convicted of conspiracy to violate mine safety standards. Blankenship finished his prison term last May. Anderson Cooper reported on the tragedy in 2016 for 60 Minutes.
Stanley Stewart worked at the Upper Big Branch mine for 15 years. He was 300 feet underground and had just started his shift when the explosion occurred.
I felt a little breeze of air coming from inside. I said, that's not right. Well, then it got harder, and we just took off running to the outside and looked, and you could see the whoosh just keep coming and coming. It seemed like for somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. And one of the younger guys said, hey, what happened? I said, babe, the place blew up.
The explosion occurred 1,000 feet underground and nearly 3 miles inside the mine. These photos taken by the Mine Safety and Health Administration have never been seen before and show the force of the blast. Flames moving at more than 1,500 feet per second shot through more than 2.5 miles of underground tunnels. Investigators believe the blast was caused by a spark that ignited methane gas that had built up due to inadequate ventilation. Highly flammable coal dust that had been allowed to accumulate throughout the mine fueled the explosion.
That was an early 1900s type of explosion. Conditions should never have existed for that to take place.
Stewart was there when some of the 29 miners he'd worked side by side with for decades were brought to the surface.
What kind of condition were they in?
Their faces were very black, and it smelled like dynamite. And I'll never forget that smell.
The miners ranged in age from 20 to 61. Most were fathers. A third were killed instantly.
Katherine Davis is a producer for 60 Minutes and reported on the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. Katherine, we just heard some of what caused the explosion. What exactly was Don Blankenship accused of in terms of allowing those conditions to exist?
Well, the prosecution, the charges against Blankenship were conspiring to violate mine safety laws, as well as lying to investigators and defrauding the Mine Safety Administration. The prosecution tried to prove their case by showing that he tolerated dangerous conditions in his mines. And that involved not allowing miners to spend the time to clean up things that are dangerous in a mine and not providing additional individuals to help the miners do their job. So when the coal mining today and always produces 2 really dangerous things, coal dust, which floats through the air, and methane gas. And so if you don't take steps to make sure the mine is well ventilated so that all those things move out of the mine, it produces a situation where there can be a lot of explosive material in the mine. And so that's what happened, according to the prosecution, at the Upper Big Branch mine. In addition, they said that Blankenship really was more focused on profits than safety. That was part of their case. They said he was a micromanager, which is really interesting because he's the CEO of this huge corporation, 40 mines, and yet he was being prosecuted in connection with the deaths of miners in one mine, 29 miners. So the way they did that was they presented evidence that he was on top of every detail of everything that happened at all of the mines, especially Upper Big Branch. The reason that he cared so much about Upper Big Branch is that the mine was very valuable to the company. It produced coal that is used in making steel. So the mine itself could produce in one day $600,000 worth of profit. So he wanted to make sure, according to the prosecution, that every single minute the miners were working and not worried about safety. And lastly, what he did, according to the prosecution, was he created an atmosphere of fear and retaliation in the mine. So in West Virginia, jobs are scarce, and mining is the #1 industry still today. And so the miners that we spoke to said they were afraid for their jobs. And he made it clear that their #1 job was to run coal.
Well, in the piece that we saw, we hear from some jurors who say that they actually didn't know they were charging him with misdemeanors rather than felonies, and he was not convicted of charges that could have put him in prison for 30 years. What was the reaction to the fact that Blankenship received a maximum sentence of 1 year?
It was, they were devastated. The family members were in the courtroom, many of them every day. It was a long trial. It was very complex. And they were looking for justice. And many of them said afterwards that they felt they didn't get justice. Really, the reality is that the SEC violations that he was facing, held much higher years in prison for him, potentially. And mine safety laws in this country are not very strict. The punishment for mine safety violations. And so the prosecutors did the best they could. Unfortunately, the law says that conspiring to violate mine safety laws is only a misdemeanor. It's not even a felony. And the maximum allowable sentence was 1 year.
It was a really revealing 60 Minutes investigation. If folks haven't seen it, it really kind of helps people understand why Don Blankenship is such a controversial figure today. Katherine Davis, thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate it.